have planned here an exciting evening. We have Dr. Gooch-Grayson that is here with us. I'm excited to start this discussion about, are we truly free if we do not know about our family roots and our histories, a part of that freedom? I am from Fort Worth, Texas. Juneteenth has always been a celebration as a part of my family history. So it was an honor and a privilege to chair this year's Juneteenth program. I don't know if I said it before, but I'm Dr. Nikita Harris. I teach in the Department of Communication Studies here at the University of Alabama. And I'm a part of the BFSA Association. And tonight we will have this program moderated by soon to be PhD candidate Khadijah Billingsley. I have to say this, I first met Khadijah working with a student. When I first arrived to the university in 2016, there was a student that was having a very difficult time. And I went to the Student Success Center with him. They connected him to Khadijah, and we've been working as a team ever since. And so I'm excited that she has decided to be and agreed to be a moderator for this evening's program. What we're going to do is show the president's message at the end of the presentation, if we have time, but we're going to move on, and I'm going to turn it over to Khadijah at this present time. We're having a little difficulties today, but we will move through them and work it out. Thank you for being patient.
Thank you, Dr. Harris, for that welcome. And as she mentioned, I am Khadijah Billingsley, a PhD candidate in the English department at the University of Alabama. As a former member of BFSA before I transitioned into a student role, I'm honored to be here with you all tonight. Unfortunately, tonight's poet of honor, Mr. Marvin E. Adams, is unable to join us due to a sudden illness. So we will transition directly to our featured speaker for tonight, Dr. Cynthia Gooch-Grayson. Native Omahan Cynthia K. Gooch-Grayson earned her PhD in Higher Education Administration and Leadership from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where her dissertation entitled Sisters at the Helm, a qualitative inquiry of the impact of mentoring on the career paths of 5 African-American female urban community college presidents, was the recipient of a research travel grant. She received her master's degree in family and mental health counseling at the University of the District of Columbia, a small public HBCU in our nation's capital, and a bachelor's degree in communication studies from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Passionate about motivating all people, particularly people of color, to pursue post-secondary education, her academic interests include equity, grant making, mentoring, retention, and access in post-secondary education for groups that have been historically discriminated against, disenfranchised, and marginalized. Dr. Gooch-Grayson currently serves Metropolitan Community College in the capacity of Associate Vice President for Equity and Inclusion, in addition to departmental oversight of 3 federally funded TRIO programs that serve first-generation low-income participants. A Diamond Life member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, Cynthia is proud of her 20 years of consistent active involvement, where she has served her beloved sorority locally, regionally, and now serves as a Central Region member of the National Nominating Committee. Having served on many local boards, Cynthia is an active member of her church, Habitat for Humanity Omaha board member, and a Girl Scout leader. Her favorite pastime is spending time with her husband and family, with her most loved scripture being Matthew 17:20. Married to Mr. Meredith O. Grayson, she loves spending time with her family, traveling, family genealogy, and volunteering. It is my honor to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Cynthia Gooch-Grayson.
I am the daughter of Belle. Belle was born in southeastern Oklahoma and was the daughter of Pinky, born in Bowie, Texas, before migrating to Oklahoma. Pinky was the daughter of Sarah, born in Texas. Sarah's mother's name is not known to me at this time, but it is confirmed that she was born a slave in Texas. I come to you from the ancestral land of the Omaha, Ponca, Pawnee, Oto, Missouri, and Iowa people. I work on the very campus, the historic Fort Omaha campus, where Ponca Chief Standing Bear and 29 associated Ponca men were held before the breakthrough 1879 trial. That trial confirmed what we already knew, that Native Americans were persons within the meaning of the law. Scholars compared this case in civil rights to the Dred Scott decision and Brown versus Topeka Board of Education. However, that is a different talk for another day. I come to you from sitting just blocks from the birth home of Malcolm Little to some, El Haj Malik Shabazz to others, but Malcolm X to me. I come to you from the place where the first known African was York, from the Lewis and Clark expedition, the childhood home of Gail Sayers, the birthplace of Bob Gibson, Kathy Hughes, Gabrielle Union, and Simone Sanders. So, to answer your question, are there Black folks in Nebraska? That answer is absolutely yes, and I bring you greetings. To my colleague and dear friend, Dr. Harris, and the Black Faculty and Staff Association, thank you for the kind invitation. Thank you, Ms. Billingsley, for the introduction. It's my pleasure to be with you today to discuss this topic dear to me as a novice, hobby-level family researcher, Black genealogy, Juneteenth, and its significance in the Black family. Tonight, I will review the origins of Juneteenth. And while you all likely now know this, it's critical to level set so that we all have a similar foundation and baseline. We will dialogue of how genealogy connects gaps and how significant this is to Black people's past, present, and path forward. All African descendants living in America have powerful narratives, unknown stories, unknown oppression, and unknown inequities. Genealogy can provide a missing piece, a missing family member, or empowering fact that can expose and answer some of the unknowns, provide a voice to the voiceless, and lead to self-discovery, family reunification, and cultural pride. According to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, on Freedom's Eve, or the eve of January 1st, 1863, the first watch night service took place. On that night, enslaved and freed African Americans gathered in churches and private homes all across the country, awaiting the news that the Emancipation Proclamation had taken effect. At the stroke of midnight, prayers were answered, and all enslaved people in Confederate states were declared legally free. Union soldiers, many of whom were Black, marched onto plantations and across cities in the South, reading small copies of the Emancipation Proclamation, spreading the news of freedom in Confederate states. Only through the 13th Amendment did emancipation end slavery throughout the United States. But not everyone in Confederate territory would immediately be free. Juneteenth, also called Freedom Day, Jubilee, Liberation Day, and Emancipation Day, is the oldest nationally celebrated remembrance of the ending of slavery in the United States. Dating back to 1865, on June 19th, the Union soldiers, led by Major General Gordon Granger, arrived in Galveston, Texas, with the news that the war had ended and that the enslaved were now free. This, of course, was 2.5 years after Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. It's noteworthy to mention that Black people's liberation in this country came at differing times in different parts of the country in North America. The celebration of freedom has strong connections to watch night services at church and college homecomings, specifically HBCU homecomings, and Black family reunions. Now, with the surrender of General Lee in April of 1865 and the arrival of General Granger's regiment, the forces were finally strong enough to influence and overcome the resistance caused by the white slaveholders who did not want to relinquish their power over human beings and free labor. Plain and simple. Efforts to explain this delay in the delivery of this important news have produced several versions that have been handed down through the years. Of course, communication was slower in the 1800s. One explanation is that a messenger was murdered on his way to Texas with the news of the freedom. Another is that the enslavers deliberately withheld the information to maintain the labor force on the plantations. And still yet another opinion is that federal troops waited for the slave owners to reap the benefits of one last cotton harvest before going to Texas to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. Whatever the reason, conditions in Texas remained well beyond what was legal. Now let's talk about that regiment of General Granger. But first, know that the Juneteenth story is sentimentalized and differs depending on who is telling it. Certain critical elements are absent and whitewashed with President Lincoln and General Granger as star and co-star. However, organizations such as the Juneteenth National Observance Foundation have uncovered a little known part of that narrative. Now, you must be aware that Granger was joined by his more than 2,000 Union troop regiment. According to the Juneteenth Legacy Project, historical accounts confirm that the United States Colored Troops Regiment set sail from Virginia to Mobile, Alabama, and they were to continue to South Padre Island, Texas. Storms and rough seas on the voyage depleted the infantry of coal and water, forcing the ship to redirect to Galveston for supplies. Official documents show and confirm that several United States Colored Troop regiments were in Galveston June 18th through the 20th, 1865. Unplanned timing that overlapped with Granger's famous release of General Order Number 3. Look at God. Although Granger issued the orders, several claims suggest that there was no public ceremony in Galveston, but instead he came ashore. He instructed his soldiers to go about the countryside, informing slaveholders that their slaves had to be freed immediately, and enforce that order. The presence of these several Union regiments of the U.S. colored troops that by coincidence marched into Galveston at the same time as Granger was sharing the General Order Number 3 had to provide a powerful image to the island's enslaved people who were unaware to the fact that they had been granted freedom by Lincoln 2 years prior. Imagine, if you possibly can, the joy, the celebration, and the free expression exhibited. Answered prayers, dreams coming to life, and futures imagined with freedom. When people heard the news, they began to gather their things and head away from the homes of their former owners. Called the scatter, the now former slaves left to head north or to set out to find the family that they had been separated from. However, some former slaves experienced bewilderment in determining whether to remain working in this abusive environment or to venture into the wilderness, praying and hoping to find family stripped away for decades among decades and moved about the country for the slaveholders' economic gains. By the end of the Civil War, many slave owners in inundated southern states had transferred their contraband to Texas, which then swelled with over 250,000 slaves who were now emancipated. Imagine by law that you have been kept uneducated and dependent as legal livestock. Still, some freed slaves boldly struck out to new territory and began sharecropping and saving money so that they could buy land for homesteads, churches, and schools. Sharecroppers often had to rent their shanties and repay for the clothes on their back. So this new indentured servitude was far from desirable, but they were free under the law, and that was worth celebrating. Unbothered by the order's recommendation to remain in place and work, many left during the original reading. It's painfully clear that the torture, the abuse, oppression, maltreatment, rape, and more endured by the enslaved did not make for most wanting to stay. From 1820 to 1860, nearly 2 million slaves were traded and taken from their families to work cotton fields in the lower southern states, along with Texas and Oklahoma. Nevertheless, the thought of reunification with their family, persistent prayer, and their faith did not waver as a collective. As African Americans began to scatter, they used notifications in churches along with the emergence of what? The Black press. The presence of ads, stories, and letters to the editor was constant in search of their families. Decades of separation had scattered Blacks all over. Help Me to Find My People, the African American search for family lost in slavery, detailed that they shaped their memories into brief messages they published, hoping that word would come back to them about the whereabouts of their relatives. They scraped together fragments of memory and made judgments with the information they had and could recall. They provided names, ages, physical descriptions of skin color, blemishes, and more. They detailed relationships, locations of plantations, points of separation, and particulars about the men and women who had previously owned them, and the names of the men that traded them, whatever they thought would trigger recognition among readers and listeners. They also called out from the newspaper pages to the people that they thought would care and would help. Last Seen is a project of the Department of History at Villanova University and Mother Bethel AME Church. Launched in 2017, Last Seen aimed to publish 1,000 ads from a handful of newspapers published in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War to help document the transition from slavery to freedom. The project now includes over 3,500 ads spanning 8 decades from 275 newspapers. Their goal is to publish 5,000 ads. In addition to publishing these ads, making them available to genealogists and researchers, Last Seen includes lesson plans and resources for teachers to use in their classrooms at all grade levels to help teach the hard history of slavery. All is available at no cost. Now, let's get back to Juneteenth. Memories of the historic day of June 19, 1865, and its festivities served as motivation for the former slaves and a release from the growing pressures encountered in their new territories. On June 19, 1866, freedmen in Texas celebrated the first anniversary of Juneteenth with what became an annual celebration known as Jubilee Day. The first Juneteenth included sports, cookouts, songs, a time for reassuring each other, oratory, church services, games, dancing, music, parades, praying, and the gathering of remaining family members. This grew with more participation from descendants. Juneteenth continued to be highly revered in Texas decades later, with many former slaves and descendants making an annual pilgrimage back to Galveston on this date. The first Juneteenth and subsequent celebrations resulted in former slave owners watching their financial ranks get drastically downgraded, and it is not surprising this resentment still continues. In the early years, some communities refused to allow Juneteenth celebrations on public property. Many families were forced to find rural areas for their get-togethers. Churches were a popular alternative since local governments had no control over them. Foods such as red velvet cake and strawberry soda are often seen at Juneteenth celebrations. It is said that the red food is chosen for the meals on that day because red is considered the color of resistance. Genealogy connects historical gaps between slavery, where we are now, who we are, and how we can use it to discover a complete picture of the past, the present, and our future. Our past neither ends nor starts with our memory. If you are of African descent, your ancestry began in this country as early as 1619, with most of our ancestors arriving by 1790. Our families have shaped this country and are more American than most, except for the Native Americans. Our impact and the Black experience in this country increases when we conduct genealogy. By exploring and answering questions about how your surname was acquired, what naming patterns are present, who are you named after or who named you, who had a profound influence on the family, what gifts were passed on from generation to generation to generation. Did you come from a farming family? Were women midwives in your family? Were men deacons, ministers? What denomination of church were your ancestors? Where are most of them buried? From where did they migrate? To where did they migrate? Generational continuity is established and begins by looking back at your family and what makes your family unique. It counters who we are and what we believe about us rather than what is said by others. It empowers us and challenges us as a people. Now, most of our ancestors did not write down their stories, but instead passed them from generation to generation by word of mouth, like that sweet potato pie, pound cake recipe. Most stories were told as funny jokes or memories by an elder, focusing on specifics and not necessarily historical experiences that put things into perspective. As your family historian or archivist, that's your duty. Writing a story that has only been felt, told, or hidden by generations of silence, whose past has more questions than answers. Black people need to have strong family memory. After all, our families are misunderstood, primarily because of our past, as too often someone else told it. The more we tell our own stories, the more identity we give our ancestors and defend that they were not unknown, faceless people. Confronting our past builds bridges back to the ancestral family separated from us. When conducting genealogy research, it is important to allow feelings to emerge, and it's okay about family and the past and its significance. Read and share with others, but most importance is talking, filming, and recording your family elders now. Now, more about the origin of our holiday. Among the freed Texans was Virginia native John Henry Jack Yates, his wife Harriet, and their 11 children. Born into slavery, Yates was one of the few slaves who learned to read and write, in addition to acquiring carpentry skills. Following emancipation, the Yates family moved to Houston, where Jack became a wagon driver and a Baptist preacher, ministering to freed persons moving into the area. In January 1866, Yates became the founding pastor of the Antioch Missionary Baptist Church, the first Black Baptist church organized in Houston. Committed to the education of the formerly enslaved, Yates and his congregation allowed the Freedmen's Bureau to use their building as a school site. Yates, in 1872, along with 3 others, raised funds to buy land in Houston for a public park for freedmen, since they were restricted to where they could gather. After that, Houston's Juneteenth celebrations were held in what they named as Emancipation Park, the first public park in the great state of Texas. Following the turn of the 20th century, With the coming of age in a new generation of African Americans, the Texas tradition of Juneteenth declined in some areas and was not consistently celebrated for decades in many parts. Some civil rights demonstrators in the early 1960s wore Juneteenth badges, but it was not until the Poor People's March on Washington in 1968 did Juneteenth experience a true resurrection and renaissance and became popular beyond Texas. Beginning on May 30th, 1968, marchers from throughout America started to journey to the nation's capital. Among the more prominent marchers, folk from Marks, Mississippi traveled 1,000 miles to DC in a caravan of 28 wagons pulled by 56 mules. They arrived on Juneteenth, complete with the parade down Pennsylvania Avenue. Made aware of the significance of Juneteenth on that day from the folks in Mississippi, some DC marchers afterward initiated observations of the tradition in their communities from that day forward. In 1980, and thanks to Al Edwards, an African-American state politician, Juneteenth was declared an official holiday in Texas. So the holiday slowly spread from Texas across the nation. From the beginning, Juneteenth has straddled a line from being celebrations to calls of action, a call to action on behalf of the nation, not just Black Americans, to secure social justice, to recognize Juneteenth as a national holiday, to stop killing us, to stop Black on Black homicides, to end voter suppression, and so much more. The 2020 murder of George Floyd both exposed police brutality and his connectedness with Juneteenth. George Floyd, prior to living in Minnesota, was from Houston's 3rd Ward, the same 3rd Ward where legendary Jack Yates built centers for education, churches, and Emancipation Park. George Floyd was a graduate of Houston's Jack Yates High School, established in 1926 as the Yates Colored High School during segregation. The school was named for Reverend Jack Yates and his great work in Houston's Black community. It is highly likely that Mr. Floyd, as a 3rd Ward resident and graduate of Yates High School, participated and was well versed in Juneteenth history and participated in school, the community, and citywide observances and celebrations. So my Alabama friends, what to you will be Juneteenth? A call of celebration or activism, such as signing the petition for Mrs. Opal Lee to make Juneteenth a national holiday? Will you research your family or share information with the family members about your family with others in your family? Or interviewing the seasoned members on your family tree, still in the land of the living? What to you will be Juneteenth? I am Cynthia, the daughter of Belle, and I celebrate Juneteenth. Belle was born in southeastern Oklahoma and was the daughter of Pinky, born in Bowie, Texas, before migrating to Oklahoma. Pinky was the daughter of Sarah, born in Texas. Sarah's mother is not known to me at this time, but it was confirmed that she was born a slave in Texas. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gooch-Grayson, for such an awesome talk. And I think it'll definitely be foundational for the subsequent discussion. For all of our participants, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box or unmute yourself so that you can directly communicate with Dr. Gooch-Grayson. I also know that we are live streaming on Facebook. I personally don't have access to that chat feed, but if someone else does and sees a question populate, definitely let me know. We can address those as well.
Ms. Billingsley, I do have a PowerPoint that I wanted to share really quickly.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I'll just talk through these few slides that I've put together that underscore some of the points that I made in the presentation. So Juneteenth and Genealogy, the exploration of the Black family. The two photographs on the left, well, the one on the left and the one in the center are from early Juneteenth celebrations in Texas. And this slide is an image of the United States Colored Troops number 25. It was really important for me to share that information about this regiment's influence in the Juneteenth history, because as I mentioned previously, folk will wipe you out and erase you if you let them. And it's important that we tell our narrative using supporting documents and information. This is a map of the domestic slave trade. So you can tell where the ports of entry of the enslaved came in. But noteworthy to mention are all the places by which the enslaved were traded. And then go all the way over to the furthest port east of Galveston, or excuse me, west of Galveston. So if the news came to Galveston late as we talked about, but when the scatter occurred, look at all the places, and all the different trading points. So that is why those ads were so significant to the formerly enslaved. And on the website Last Seen, they do have success stories of family reunification by the ads that were placed by some of the former slaves. And here is an example of 3 ads placed. The one on the far left is, I'll just read it. Dear editor, I wish to inquire about my people. I left them in a trader's yard in Alexandria with a Mr. Franklin. They were to be sent to New Orleans. Their names were Jarvis, Moses, George, and Maria Gaines. Any information of them will be thankfully received. Address me at Aberdeen, Mississippi. Celia Rhodes. I will read the one on the far right. Information wanted of my husband and son. We parted at Richmond, Virginia in 1860. My son's name was Jas Monroe Holmes. My husband's name was Frank Holmes. My son was sold in Richmond, Virginia. I don't know where they carried him to. My husband was not sold. I left him in Richmond, Virginia, and I and 5 children, Henry, Gabrielle, Charles, Dorothy, and Jacob, were sold to a trader who lived in Texas. I am now old, and I don't think that I shall be here long, and I would like to see them before I die. Any information concerning them will be thankfully received by Eliza Holmes, Latonia, Fayette County, Texas. This next slide, the states in the pink recognized Juneteenth prior to the year 2000, while the states in yellow acknowledged the holiday between 2000 and 2009. States in the blue began in 2010 or later. This photograph is an early Juneteenth celebration. And if you look to the gentleman where my cursor is on the very far left, the tall, handsome Black man, that is none other than Jack Yates. And there he is again, Reverend Jack Yates. And here is his home. Isn't it beautiful? So it is a historic site in Houston. This horse and buggy is had participated in a Juneteenth parade or Emancipation Parade in Houston. And you see the wheels are decorated with flowers and the women are impeccably dressed. And those two women are two of Jack Yates' daughters. To the left, that photograph is of Emancipation Park in Houston, and the photograph on the right is Jack Yates High School. And I did this, the poster on the left, remember I talked about that emancipation was celebrated in different times of the year. Here's a poster from an Emancipation Day celebration. I don't call it Juneteenth, I found this, but it's Emancipation celebration in September, on September 22nd, 1891 in Omaha. St. John AME Church is the oldest church, Black church in Nebraska. And then I found this ad, especially for my friend Dr. Harris. It is of Emancipation Proclamation 54th anniversary in 1919 at Herman's Park in Fort Worth. And so when I come to Fort Worth, Dr. Harris, you have to take me to Herman's Park. And here are the red poster is from Seattle, and that's 1980. The one in the middle is an ad from the Omaha World Herald, and it is 1999. And the advertisement on the far right is for this year's Juneteenth in Omaha. This advertisement here was from 2019 in Kansas City, Missouri. This one on the left, I really like it. It is from Lemoyne-Owen College in Memphis, and it's for this year. And as you see, the one on the right is Kansas City Reunion for Juneteenth this year. Sources for genealogical research, living family members. I can't stress that enough. Talk to your family, record your family. I have a cousin on here. I think he's still on here. I have a lot of info. He's younger than I am. I have a lot of information I need to pass on and share with him. So I'm super happy that he's on here. His grandmother was my mother's sister. But living family members, Freedmen's Bureau records, vital statistics, family Bibles, Federal Writers Project, which a lot of former slave narratives, the WPA had a project where actually the Library of Congress has a lot of slave narratives as well. The census, military records, family homestead, church records, cemeteries, newspapers, mortuaries, funeral programs, land probates, and account records. Now, if you don't know why research from what I've shared earlier,
Okay.
if you need any further rationales why family research and genealogy in celebration of Juneteenth, we can use genealogy and genetics.
Second, if someone can mute, where's Tammy?
Somebody needs to mute.
Oh.
We can use genealogy and genetics to revolutionize the way that we teach history and science with the help of DNA. We can reawaken the love of books and the love of Black knowledge. We can find the lost understanding of the rich role of education in the African-American past. And you hear about FOE or some of the young folk, family over everything. Everybody says family over everything. Well, Black genealogy truly is family over everything. And I wanted to provide provide you with some resources. Two of the books I use, the one on the far left, Black Roots, which is by genealogist Tony Burrows. He's amazing. He's come and spoken at my institution at least 3 times. And then Finding a Place Called Home, which is on the far right. I have that book as well. And the Center for Black Genealogy is at the lower level of the screen. That is a website and an organization, and there's 3 other resources for you as well. And I'm going to conclude with this.
Information wanted of Samuel Holland by his son, Dennis Holland. Samuel Holland was a slave to Captain George Gaither of Montgomery County, Maryland. He was married to Rachel Bright, having 2 sons, Stephen and Dennis. The last part of him was August 22nd, 1817 AD. If anybody knowing of his whereabouts or can give any information concerning him will be greatly obliged by this writer by addressing Dennis Holland, Ellicott City, Howard County, Maryland, shoemaker, bootmaker, and member of the African Methodist Episcopal Church.
Mr. Editor, I wish to inquire for my kin people. I left them in South Carolina about the year 1851. My husband was William Stokes Dosier. He belonged to Allen Dosier, a Baptist preacher. I have 2 boys, John Wesley Dosier and Willis Dosier. I was sold from them by Johnson Lowry to Sam Watson. Watson sold me to Paul Delameyer in Sumter County, Alabama. My mother's name was Maria Brooks. I left her in Mount William City, South Carolina. She belonged to a Dr. George Yardy. My father, John Brooks, belonged to Smith Brooks. Before I left South Carolina, I had 5 brothers and 2 sisters. Brothers George Coleman and Richard Reuser, Philip Christie, Willis Christie, and John Brooks. I left them in Edgefield, South Carolina. My sisters, Amy and Eliza, I heard from during the war. My name is now Maria Freeman. Address me, Edwards, Harris County, Mississippi, care of Mr. P.W. Baldwin.
Ms. Billingsley, I can entertain questions now at this time.
Yes, ma'am. So I think those videos are definitely a good segue into our first question. Those in tandem with the ads that you showed us evoked a lot of emotion for us, particularly for me as a viewer and a reader. And so Dr. Pamela Foster asked, could you talk a little bit about some Blacks' hesitations to research their family genealogy because it is painful and they don't want to remember?
I get it. It is painful, but I think that we all have heard that if you don't know where you come from, how will you know where you go or where you're going? So I think it behooves us to embrace the emotion and research our families. Otherwise, it leaves others to interpret it and to speak it for us. So it is emotional, but it's okay to sit it down for a while. It's okay for me to call Dr. Harris and say, girl, guess what I just found out? We share stories like that all the time. So it's great to have someone like her to research things together.
Yes, there's also another question. I know you just showed us a video from what I'm surmising is the Last Seen YouTube channel, but also you spoke of lesson plans and other resources that the organization offers. Can they also be found online?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. Again, if anyone has any questions, definitely feel free to drop them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. I will actually ask a follow-up question to or about the Last Seen material. And so currently there is a growing national push to eradicate classrooms of critical race theory or any conversations about race or racial history, right? And so my question would be, how can educators, K through 12 or either higher education educators to a lesser extent, because we have a freedom that those K through 12 teachers don't really have, how can they negotiate that legislation that tries to suppress some of these conversations that we should be having with our students about such issues?
I think that every state legislation has education committees. I think we need to go and show up and let them know that we want to see ourselves reflected in the curriculum, period. We have to be more engaged in the political process. We have to elect folks at the local level who represent our interests. We have to ensure that educators infuse culturally responsive teaching methods. And no longer is it acceptable for them to whitewash the curriculum.
Yes, I would agree with that. And speaking of whitewashing, I guess I have another question in terms of preservation of family history. And so particularly within my discipline, digital humanities is a growing field, and thinking about how do I preserve this family history. I did start my own family genealogy journey. However, I got to a certain point where there was no more information available to me via the World Wide Web that is supposed to give us everything, right? And when I spoke with my family members who are still living, no one could go further than a certain spot. And so thinking about archives where this information should be preserved, right? How can we as individuals who are thinking about embarking on these journeys get this information preserved for future generations of our family?
That's an excellent question. I think that by investing in some of the books that I showed on the last slide or the slide before last, that's really important. So you know what, how to store the information that you have, how to preserve your photographs, how to preserve copies of original documents. I think that I mentioned that my great-grandmother's mother, it's documented that she was born a slave, but I don't know her name. But that's something that I'm just driven to find out more about her, and that's why I have my cousin on here, because he might be the one to help me do that, right? But we also need to utilize triangulation and different things like that to ensure that it's factual and it's not that we don't romanticize things, that might have been passed down to us. Also, plan a trip to your regional archives. Every area had, for Omaha, Nebraska, the regional archives happen to be in Kansas City, Missouri. There's a state historical society. You can go there. The ancestors on my father's side are in Nicodemus, Kansas, which was a Black homestead community. I've gone there and walked the cemeteries. I've gone to southeastern Oklahoma and walked the cemeteries and invested in obtaining vital records, death certificates, birth certificates. So it's really important, and fortunately, now when I first started, Ancestry and sites like that were not available. And you just had to send off to vital statistics and look in Bibles and all of those sorts of things are still very, very important to today, but it's a little easier now. And I have taken the DNA testing and found some more information, but most of the information that I have about my family is from self-discovery and from family members.
I would like to jump in and add, because I have found a lot of history through the commercial DNA. I use ancestry DNA, but I also want to talk to about, as painful as our history is, it is also a joy. It's inspiring, it's motivating. I 3 years ago, I found out that my fourth grandmother's first cousin's son was the first African-American president of Morehouse. I walked the campus of Clark Atlanta University for 4.5 years and walked by his gravesite and did not know that we shared ancestry, that was family. I recently found out, I have my DNA, 92% of my DNA based upon ancestry is African. It's really high. But I recently found out just this weekend, just doing research on another line of a family, my fourth great grandfather is from Africa. In the 1880 census, it states, and I was just blown away because I have been doing genealogy research for about 5 years seriously now, and I've never seen that on a US census. And my heart has been filled since that discovery. And there are things that are painful, no doubt, but there are things that bring a lot of joy. When we had Isabel Wilkerson come and talk through CAST, and she was talking about the research, and she stated that children that know about their family history tend to do better in school. So knowing about our family roots, knowing about our history and our background, there is a lot of benefits to how we motivate children, how we bond with our families, and how we look at the future quite differently by knowing where we come from. So just don't look at it as very painful. There are a lot of gems in genealogy research, a lot of things that my grandparents didn't know that I've been able to find out. I hate that they're not here that I could share with them, but you know what? I'm going to share it with the next generation.
Absolutely, Dr. Harris. And even in looking at the census records, to go across that line when you see an ancestor's name and find out their occupation, and then find out, no, they did not rent their farm, they owned it. How empowering is that? 3-4 generations ago, farm owners, not renters. So that's motivational. That is motivational. You have it in your DNA to own property, to become educated. And then many of them, they had no formal education, and they owned property. So they had an economic mindset.
Right. And I just want to say this, my grandfather, the third great grandfather, Ned Hardin, who was a slave. Before then, I thought my family, the first time they voted was during the 1960s. But I found out through research that he voted in 1867 in Texas. Then they passed legislation so Blacks could not vote. But my voting in my family did not start. And he was a slave from Leon County, Florida. That's Tallahassee area. And he voted in the 1867 election. So when we're talking to young people about voting rights, it's even, it's just so much out there that we don't know, and that we think because of historians that we really do need to explore.
I see a question. You find that those of an older generation gather and store obituaries. Has that been a resource for you as well? Absolutely. I have a whole stack of obituaries. And in fact, I create them for people, oftentimes family members, friends, because they may not have the means to do so. And it's one less thing that they have to endure during the grieving process. And if they give me a little bit of information, I gladly offer that. But absolutely, obituaries has tons of information, tons and tons and tons of information. Some of it is not accurate always. However, again, I talked about triangulation. You know, you can confirm information that you find, and you know, sometimes you just need to put it aside until you get new information. So it is a continual process. It's not a one and done. It's something that you can go from one branch of your family tree to another, and then go back to it, and you might find another discovery. So that in case, you know, or if it gets emotional, you may want to set it aside. But like Dr. Harris said, it has been it's addictive, and it's just so wonderful to know from whence you've come.
I wanted to add another point, Dr. Grayson, Dr. Pam Foster. There, like you said, there are genealogical societies and archivists who also can help people if they're kind of stuck and don't know what direction to go in.
Oh, absolutely, but
here in Alabama,
it can be very,
yeah,
very expensive too.
Well, some of them are free. Here,
Okay.
we started a genealogical society, me and my husband, moving from New York to Montgomery. And the state archivist was a rich resource for
Right.
hearing services. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, I just want to.
Her name was Fraisine Taylor. She retired, but still around to really help people do their family genealogies.
Before we move to showing President Bell's address video again, I wanted to check in and make sure that we addressed all the questions. I'm not seeing any more in the chat. All right, I think that's everything. I'm sure on behalf of all the participants, I can say this. Thank you so much, Dr. Grayson, for such a invigorating discussion and presentation. I think, you know, with Juneteenth being at the end of this week, you've given us a lot to think about, and also a lot to do, as well as we think about how we preserve our own family's history, and also spread the importance of this particular holiday. So I will turn it over for the sharing of President Bell's video. And then immediately after, we will have closing remarks from Dr. Pamela Foster, who is a former president of BFSA and a current member.
So it doesn't look like that video is going to play. I'm Dr. Pamela Foster, professor in the Department of Community Medicine, Population Health here at the University of Alabama. Let me just end in my closing remarks, start out by saying thank you so much, Dr. Cynthia Gooch-Grayson, for that wonderful presentation of really tying in the history of Juneteenth, Jubilee Day, to some with genealogy, the importance of genealogy. And also thank you, Khadidra Billingsley, our moderator, who did an excellent job with fielding questions and stimulating the discussion. I just wanted to throw a couple of phrases you used in your presentation, Dr. Grayson. On unknown oppression and unknown joys is really the history of African people throughout the diaspora, especially here in the United States. And what really resonated with me, you talked a little bit about attempts historically to disrupt history and how it's so important for us to resist that, particularly not only for us as a people, but for the country, the contributions we've made to the country. But I love the fact that it's more about us. It's more about our healing and really family. I love what you said about family reunification. And I look at it in this day and time as us passing this on to the next generation. So really looking at our past, our present, and our future. I'll give a little story. I was at a wedding in Minnesota over Memorial Weekend, and there were about 150 guests there. The groom, African-American groom, last name Hayward, was marrying a white female. A lot of that going on lately in our families. The groom's father is a Hayward. He's the first cousin of my mother, who was 86 years old. So he invited his niece, another Hayward, and his nephew, a Hayward. So there were only 3 Haywards in that room out of 150 guests, besides the groom's immediate family. So I was just so excited because Kenneth, who is my second cousin, introduced me as the family historian to the niece and the nephew. And they were so excited. We exchanged information because they really were excited about getting. They did not know the family history and they wanted to know the family history. So I think what your talk really illustrates is how important it is for us to really pass this information on about who we are. We're Gullah Geechee people, South Carolina, grandparents and ancestors from St. Helena Island in South Carolina. So a rich Gullah Geechee history. So I'm excited to do that for them and looking forward to it. So thank you so much for your talk and making the connection for us.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for those remarks, Dr. Foster. I knew that you would do a great job in kind of summing it up and closing us out with a good theme. Can
I just add, Nikita?
Yes.
I was happy to do it. Nikita and I traveled with a group of 13 faculty members from UA to Ghana about 2 years ago. So just really excited to be on the program with my sister.
Thank you. Thank you. We had a great time, an awesome time. And I want to thank Khadidra. I forgot to note, because we had the little technical difficulties, that Khadidra was voted one of the 2 top outstanding graduate students by the Graduate Student Association this past May. And so we are very excited to know that, and I celebrate her. And that, like I said, I always enjoy working with her as a team. I want to close by, for those of you who weren't on our last program, we have a petition that we would like for you all to sign. If you go to the bfsa.ua.edu, and if somebody could write that in the chat, we have a petition that is originated by Opal Lee, who is I call her the mother of the Juneteenth movement. And she's a native Texan, and she has been advocating to make Juneteenth a national holiday. And the BFSA, we have decided that this year we were going to join her in making sure that she gets enough petitions to take to DC, so that our state legislators know that we are serious and this is something that we want to happen. A lot of people don't know that Alabama is the 40th state to recognize Juneteenth as a state holiday, but we want to make this a federal national holiday. Also, we're asking everyone to join Opal Lee's walk on June the 19th. And if you participate in the walk, a virtual walk, you can walk anywhere, just walk in recognition and observe. Please email us your pictures of you on your walk and we will post it on the website. So we want to support Opal Lee. Next week, I had the opportunity to interview Ms. Lee, will air on our BFSA website, and we'll be sending email out to faculty and the university community. But for those that are not a part of our community, you can still retrieve that interview from our website. So I just want to close this evening and thank everyone for joining us, and happy Juneteenth. Thank you.
I see BFSA as a caucus, and that means that it's important that people of color who are faculty and staff at the University of Alabama be connected.
It's a great place to get started on campus. So for any new professional, new to campus, whatever that may be, I think it's a place where you'll find a range of experience as far as work experience. There's some new professionals in there, and there's some folks who've been here 30 plus years.
Really, it's a chance to connect with folks who know what it's like to be Black and here at UA.
One of the biggest thing would be the opportunities that it presents. A lot of things that I would not have known about on campus if it wasn't as a result of my membership with BFSA. So just having that connection, having people of like minds, people who care about the same issues as you, and just working with those people, getting the opportunity to learn about events on campus that will be beneficial to you.
All right, I'm Allison Wren. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm a BFSA ambassador. So we act as the liaison between the actual BFSA faculty and staff and then the student body. BFSA is one of the best things that I got myself involved in on campus because, like I said, it's helped me with a lot of my self-confidence. It's helped me to become more involved, to meet more people, to gain more opportunities for mentorship, and to gain more opportunities just to put myself out there and to prepare myself for the real world.
The BFSA Scholars, I think, is the program that I would point to as one of the most beneficial. They're doing some great work helping our students for our scholarships, getting organized, getting plugged into the community.
I've been a supporter of Black scholars, from the beginning and precursors, and currently this year in particular, trying to support the ambassadors both with time and financially. The kind of things we support, speakers, all those things. I think for faculty and staff, making sure that there's just general things to do and things of interest for people to get together around. So those range, but I think all those things are beneficial.
BFSA, because BFSA is family. It really is. It's a means of family here on the University of Alabama campus.
Being in BFSA is about being connected and collaborating to support students of color and to support all students in their success. I'm excited to be a part of the organization.
Yeah, I'd like being able to support the university and do things that help the university grow and develop. And BFSA is just a good outlet for doing those kinds of things.